Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of Starship Flight 10, happening today from Starbase, Texas, just north of the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now, so good to have you with us here on this Sunday afternoon. We are broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. And you're looking live at the more than 400-foot tall Starship rocket standing tall at Pad A. This video coming to us courtesy of our friends at Lab Padre. SpaceX is currently T-minus 2 hours, 39 minutes, 6 seconds, and counting to the opening of a 1-hour-long launch window ahead of the next test flight for this program. SpaceX continues to develop its Starship in an iterative development style, meaning that its path towards getting to a finalized operational version of Starship means flying as often as possible and learning along the way, folding those learnings into the next flight, and then getting back to the pad as quickly as possible. The Federal Aviation Administration cleared SpaceX to proceed with plans for its 10th flight of Starship. The pad is clear. The roads are blocked off to traffic. We're 2.5 hours away from, again, the opening of the window for today's launch opportunity. It'll open up locally at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. That is 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 23:30 UTC. As we're getting things rolling this afternoon, I want to thank the more than 700 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. We'll also be joined a little bit later in the program by our friend and fellow space reporter Stephen Clark, former Spaceflight Now member of the family, now space reporter with Ars Technica. He's down at Starbase today, so looking forward to his insight and expertise in covering both SpaceX and the Starship program specifically, of course. As it stands right now, we're also just about 8 minutes away from what is billed as a technical talk from SpaceX founder and chief engineer Elon Musk. Our understanding at this point in time is that it will be an audio presentation, so not the same as the video that was posted last time following Starship Flight 9. Of course, if there are visual components to the presentation, we will work to bring those into our broadcast as well. But that's scheduled to begin in just about 7 minutes at the top of the hour. However, as is always the caveat, we like to throw in with live television or a live news event. Things are fluid, and as we saw with Starship Flight 9, the company talk that was supposed to happen ahead of the launch didn't end up getting shared to the public until after all was done and dusted. So we will keep you in the loop, but we certainly plan to bring in that coverage for you at the top of the hour or whenever SpaceX is ready to begin that Spaces event. As always, just a quick reminder for our friends in the chat. We've got moderator Rick Donner helping us out today alongside Astro Joe. You can help the mods out by conversing in English so that our moderators can respond as appropriate. We also ask that you don't delve into overt politics or religion. Hold off on typing in all caps or spamming the chat with a huge block of emojis. Most importantly, though, treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated, and we'll get along swimmingly. One last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space or spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature to have your comment or query elevated for discussion. Also, big thanks to our channel member community, including Cumulus Granatus, who's able to answer folks' questions in the chat. Thanks to you for your ongoing support of what we do here at Spaceflight Now. And thanks for making this and every live launch opportunity possible. With that, before we are potentially going to be listening into the technical presentation from Mr. Musk, want to bring in via audio our friend Stephen Clark, former Spaceflight Now member and now space reporter with Ars Technica. Stephen, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing fine. Afternoon, Will.
Afternoon. It sounds like, as we were talking about before we started the stream, it's been a little stormy here in Florida, a little stormy down there in Texas, but thankfully clearing out in both places.
Yeah, we had a nice little downpour here about an hour ago, so hopefully that is going to clear out the atmosphere of all the moisture, and right now skies are mostly sunny, and I think shaping up to be a nice evening to launch if things hold.
Fingers crossed on that. Well, before we get to the top of the hour and potentially the beginning of Elon Musk's technical update as it's being billed right now, the last time we heard from him, it was a presentation called Making Life Multiplanetary. Given that this is being billed as, quote, a technical update, what are some of the main things that you're, I guess, expecting to hear? And then if it's different, what are you hoping to hear from Elon?
Yeah, I'm hoping to hear some more tangible updates on things that are more near-term, close reality, maybe in the coming months or year. Things like an update on version 3 of Starship. This is version 2 that we're going to be seeing launched. So version 3 is on the horizon when that is going to be ready to fly potentially. Maybe an update on the second launch pad here at Starbase, and an update on launch pad development and development of a second Starship factory down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And I think a big one will be an update, hopefully, on progress of testing, ground testing, and a schedule update for when in-orbit refueling may be attempted for the first time with 2 Starships in low Earth orbit. That is a critical milestone that I think is something that is going to be a huge challenge for SpaceX and really anyone who attempts to, not just SpaceX. If anyone, as we heard in the preview for Starship, is to help facilitate a settlement on Mars, and just some updates on the steps along the way toward that would be great to hear from him this afternoon. We'll see.
Yeah, and as far as the timing of the talk, it sounds like that is now pushed back an hour. It was supposed to start at 5. The update on X is now showing a start time of 6 p.m. Eastern, so now looking like it's going to be just about a half hour or so, the pre-show essentially leading up to launch. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wait just a little bit longer to get that in, and do see some folks in the live chat hearing some of the audio issues we may be having with Steven. We'll see if we can work that out. It's a little challenging, the audio and connection setup down at Starbase, so we'll troubleshoot that in the background and see if we might be able to clean that up as best we can, but there's some limitations to what we can do, unfortunately. We'll come back to Steven in just a little bit as we're trying to sort through the audio snafus. Again, it's a challenging internet situation down there at Starbase. Steven is just about 3.5, 4 miles away from the pad going due west. So got a nice seat for viewing, but the internet setup along the Rio Grande is not the most ideal. So we're troubleshooting best we can, and we'll bring it back in shortly. In the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about some of the milestones that we're looking forward to ahead of the flight of Starship Flight 10. One thing to note as we bring in the countdown timeline is SpaceX is flowing things a little bit differently than they have in recent missions. They are, instead of starting with the liquid oxygen and then progressing into the methane fueling as they have before, they're instead starting with liquid methane fueling, which is the fuel for the ship and the booster, and then progressing into liquid oxygen. Last time we saw this was back in one of the earlier flights of Starship, when they were still using the Block 1 variant of the vehicle. Things will really get cooking, though, in just about an hour and 15 minutes when the SpaceX launch director makes the call that they are go for the start of prop load. Fueling begins again with the T-minus 53-minute mark. This is also one of the earliest start times for the beginning of the fueling process that we've seen since the earliest missions going back to flights 2 and 3. Once the fueling of ship begins with, again, that liquid methane, then they'll transition into LOX load on the ship upper stage, going in through that QD that you can see there coming out from the arm extending from launch tower. T-minus 41 minutes and 37 seconds is when booster fueling begins, followed by liquid oxygen load on the Super Heavy booster, tail number B16, beginning at T-minus 35 minutes and 52 seconds. The timeline at this point is what we've seen in the last several launches for the Starship program. Raptor engine chill for both the Super Heavy booster and the ship upper stage begins at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. Somewhat similar to what we are used to seeing with the Falcon 9 rocket, running a little liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, protecting those engines from thermal shock during startup. 3 minutes 20 seconds before liftoff, the ship loading wraps up. Same is true on the booster stage at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds before T0. 30 seconds before launch, the launch director will give their go for liftoff. As we have seen with other Starship flights, SpaceX does have the ability to hold the countdown at the T-minus 40-second mark for several minutes once the fueling campaign has begun. If for whatever reason, though, SpaceX has got down to the T-minus 10-second point in time and has activated the flame deflector, if for whatever reason in those final 10 seconds there's an issue that comes up and they need to scrub the launch, they do need a slightly longer lead time to get those water tanks back and full. And so it would not necessarily, well, it wouldn't be an option to pivot to a later time. It would essentially be like with a Falcon 9 rocket when fueling begins on the Falcon 9 that locks them into a T0. In a similar vein here for the Starship rocket, once the flame deflector is active, then they no longer have any latitude in their current launch window today. T-minus 3 seconds is when the Raptor engine ignition sequence gets underway, and those 33 Raptor engines at the base of the Super Heavy booster start to roar to life. And then at T0, SpaceX likes to say, excitement guaranteed. Time now T-minus 2 hours, 23 minutes, 38 seconds, and counting. Sounds like we've got things sorted out with Stephen Clark's audio, so we'll go ahead and welcome him back into the broadcast. Stephen, just making sure you sound good. How are things there? Well, the tech gremlins persist apparently. We'll work to get Stephen back momentarily. Hey, Stephen, I think we've got you back in now. Are you hearing us okay?
Yeah, loud and clear, Will. Can you hear me right now?
Yes, much better. So,
good deal.
Not to have you rehash too much of what you said before, but since your audio was a little garbled, maybe if you want to just give a Reader's Digest version of your previous comments of what you're looking forward to from Elon Musk's technical talk, which for folks that are just now joining us is now scheduled for no earlier than 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
Why the Reader's Digest version, Will? We have so much time to fill now until he begins speaking. So
you know what?
I will try.
That's fine. Give me the full encyclopedic version.
Okay. Well, I would like to hear some more updates on what's happening in the near term with Starship. First of all, some updates on his perspective and insights on, what's been up with version 2. Why has version 2 struggled when version 1, block 1 of Starship, was becoming increasingly successful last year, culminating, of course, in the catch of the booster. The booster still seems to be working generally fine. The ship for version 2 has been a problem child for SpaceX, and there's only one left before they move on to version 3. So just some general insights on what maybe he hoped to get out of version 2 when they started these flights back in January, and how it's stood up to those expectations or not over the last few months. And then an update on version 3, when we might see version 3 debut, would be a good update from Elon. And other than that, a big thing that I'm looking for is some technical insight and updates on the status of some of the ground testing that they're doing in advance of the cryogenic refueling demonstration that they have on contract with NASA. That was expected this time last year. That was expected to be happening or maybe around this time, but now it seems to be well into 2026, perhaps even a year away. We'll see before that demonstration happens. Just updates on where that stands from a technical readiness perspective, and also from a schedule perspective of when he anticipates that might be happening, because that is the key, really, that will unlock Starship. Everything that Starship is promised to do, other than launch Starlink satellites, which in and of itself it will be an important mission for Starship, but everything else hinges on the ability to transfer cryogenic methane and liquid oxygen from one ship to another in low Earth orbit. And I think it's important to keep one eye on the vision, which is what Elon Musk shared with us in May, back in his previous update. But I think it's also important just to have a dose of reality of all the milestones that have to happen before any of those visionary things have a chance at becoming reality. And NASA, of course, is very keen on demonstrating the in-orbit refueling. That is one of the very few milestones that NASA has set in stone with SpaceX for their contract for the HLS, the lander for the Artemis program, is they want to see certain results for the cryogenic propellant transfer test before NASA approves them to move on to the lunar landing and then a lunar ascent demonstration before a crew landing on the moon. And of course, NASA, the Trump administration, sees themselves in a race with China and to get to the moon. And right now, we've seen some progress from China in recent weeks with the static fire of their new super heavy lift rocket, the testing of their lunar lander. Certainly looks like China is making some really tangible forward progress, and I think NASA wants to see that from SpaceX now, and just some perspective from Elon Musk would be really, really helpful for us to hear and get his thoughts on where they stand in actually achieving that contract.
Yeah, first off, want to give you kudos for your coverage of China's space program, and given that you've been tracking it as well as you have, do you see some of the video products and photos that China has been sharing in its various channels as really good and tangible progress, or do you think, like we sometimes see from more political figures here in the United States, more of posturing of where we are in our route back to the moon? I guess just your sort of check point, the pulse, if you will, on how solid is China's footing at this point.
I think it's impossible to remove posturing from any statement. Everything is very politicized, and there are nationalist factors at play both in the U.S. and in China. Both sides see themselves in competition with one another. So I think anything you hear from China, from President Xi, from President Trump, from Elon Musk, you have to have just a dose of reality that part of what they're saying is posturing, because they see themselves in competition with one another.
Yeah, that's very true. It's the moon race, the first go around, certainly had plenty of politics laden all throughout the various milestones, and can't say that's really any different this go around.
Absolutely, I think that's becoming more apparent to me. In the last few months, really is a lot of things that have been said from various sources on in the U.S. and in China have been questionable, frankly. Just things don't pass the sniff test, the acid test. We'll see what happens. Obviously, I think China has a simpler architecture, which I think is good for getting to the moon faster. They are behind, it seems to me, in developing something that is sustainable, like Starship could be, or even Blue Origin's lander could be for lunar operations. I think SpaceX, China rather, no organization in China, in my knowledge, has really demonstrated anything close to even a plan or anything beyond a concept for something like Starship. And so that is something to keep in mind. But China basically is copying Apollo to get to the moon as fast as possible, and put down 2 Chinese astronauts on the lunar surface for a couple of days, whereas Starship obviously can carry a lot more cargo, can stay at the moon longer, can be refueled, can be reused. Much different approach, but it's also more challenging. So is SpaceX up to that challenge? I think one of those challenges will be today to see if they've made progress and can make it farther in flight for Starship version 2 and move them a step closer to an orbit refueling, which I think is again, as I said earlier, is the key that will unlock Starship.
Yeah, I was just in preparing for the show, going back and looking at some video from Flight 5. Of course, for folks that remember the first time that SpaceX was able to catch the Super Heavy booster, and remembering our conversation in talking to the folks at the Human Landing System Program Office at the Marshall Space Flight Center, and how ready and excited they were, looking forward towards the refueling campaign, which at that point seemed like in the first half, moving into the summer of 2025, really seemed like a genuinely tangible thing. And now here we are, as kids are back in school, and early 2026 seems potentially optimistic for the start of that on-orbit refueling campaign to start, which is a significant setback, it would seem, from the outside.
Right. It's obviously going to be a version 3 thing. So version 2 of Starship is not capable of in-orbit refueling. So let's say today's flight goes well. They have another final version 2, if they choose to even fly it, could launch in a month or 2, let's say. That puts a version 3 flight, I would say best case, at the end of the year. Hopefully Elon will shed some light on that a little bit in his remarks later this evening. But I suspect version 3, the earliest we'll see it fly is the end of the year. And not sure how many flights of version 3 they want to reel off and get behind them before they attempt in-orbit refueling? Do they want to attempt to catch early on in version 3 and then move on to in-orbit refueling? Do they want to do a flight that tries to accomplish everything, catch, refueling, all in one mission? We'll see. No idea. Those are questions I think that I'd love to see Elon address this evening.
Yeah, those would all be really good and important milestones. Something that did jump out at me from some of the photos that we've seen throughout the course of yesterday and today from folks down at Starbase is a couple of pictures of what people are speculating may be the chairs that are going to be used inside the crew quarters for the human landing system version of Starship. So I'm hoping among the things that Musk really keys in on is, you know, some of the learnings towards and the milestones achieved in developing both the you know, bigger hardware for the HL version of Starship, but also how have they been refining the, you know, environmental system within the cabin. You know, what have they learned from the Dragon systems that maybe is being able to port over to crew habitation with inside a larger volume for Starship. I mean, there's just so much that he could talk about that I think folks would really be interested in learning, especially, you know, if your thing is the Artemis program and understanding how we're getting humans to the moon and eventually to Mars. You know, what life on Starship is going to be like is going to be really key for that.
I agree, Will, and personally, I think my focus is on Artemis and the moon because that's what has a chance of happening in the next 5 years potentially. You know, the Mars missions are fantastic, and but I think those are, you know, landing on Mars is one thing, but getting crew to Mars, getting people to Mars, taking off from Mars, generating propellant on Mars. I mean, these are questions in my view for the 2040s. Frankly, I think that's a long way off. But a moon landing has, you know, a technical challenges around it. There are engineering problems to solve. They have geopolitical concerns revolving around it. So it's interesting from multiple perspectives, commercially, geopolitically, technically, and it could happen in the next few years. Do I think it's going to happen in 2 years? Probably not. But as NASA currently officially projects, probably not. But it could happen before 2030. And so I think that is the pressing need and should be the pressing goal for Starship going forward. And I would love to hear some updates on where they are in making steps toward making that a reality.
Yeah, one thing that I would love to hear from Elon, in addition to everything that we've just talked about, is some of the logistics of the uncrewed landing and ascent demonstration. Because one thing that I'm sure has come up in your reporting and is certainly still been a question mark from folks that I've talked to is when you're talking about an ascent vehicle that is as massive as Starship, what is the, you know, Raptor engine versus lunar regolith dynamic going to look like? How much is the plume going to kick up both on the descent as well as on the ascent? You know, one of the questions that came up in a recent advisory committee discussion was, you know, when Starship lands on the moon and then they need to activate the elevator to bring astronauts down to the surface, could the dust that's kicked up, you know, interfere with the elevator mechanism? And then if it does, my goodness, then what? That's still a big question that I think is still an outstanding one that we just don't fully know.
Right, and you know that SpaceX and NASA may not know either. That may be part of the testing that's going on that I would love to hear an update about. You know, are they taking these mechanisms into, you know, environments that simulate what it's going to be like on the moon with the dust and 1/6 gravity, and seeing how they respond to those types of environments? That's just speculation on my part, but I suspect that could be what's going on behind the scenes. We're not hearing about it. I would love to hear about that. The other thing you mentioned the habitation and crew cabin. The last update I had, and granted it's been since beginning of the year, so, you know, going on 7 months now. But the last update I received from Lisa Watson-Morgan, who is the NASA HLS program manager for the Human Landing System program manager for Artemis, is there have been no decision yet between whether for Artemis landings on the moon, whether the crew will do those fully automated or if they will be a manual landing. And if it's a manual landing, will the crew use touchscreens? Will they use more conventional displays and controls like the Apollo lunar module? These are, as of a few months ago, these were still questions that were not decided among NASA and SpaceX. In fact, I suspect there's some disagreement between the two on which approach to take. Certainly between SpaceX and maybe the astronaut office at Johnson Space Center, they may have different opinions on it. So that may be something that's still being ironed out. I'd love to get an update on that as well. And I'm not sure that's going to be Elon Musk's position or a place to talk about that, since it involves NASA and astronauts. But we'll see if he touches on that or if he takes any questions about that.
Yeah, that was something that I spoke with astronaut Randy Bresnik about last year, and it was still, as you just indicated, very much a question mark as far as some of those finer details of crew interactions inside the capsule. We've got the graphic up on the screen right now, folks are seeing, of the docking between HLS Starship and the Orion capsule. We've seen a little bit of detail about some of the testing that's gone on between the passive and active docking adapter. In theory, this may be the only time that Starship docks directly with Orion, but depending on the readiness of Gateway, if that still comes to fruition on Artemis 4 and beyond, we may need to see this type of action again with that mission if they want to keep it closer to the, 2028 is the current most recent update that NASA said for Artemis 4. How realistic that is or not at this point, so I think folks can decide for themselves. But that's still, that add that to the list of things that certainly Elon could elaborate on, that I'd be fully happy to hear about, the progress towards docking and proximity work with Lockheed Martin.
Definitely agree. And, I think another question is, we've seen, specs for version 3 of Starship, and then back in May, Elon Musk's last update on Starship, he showed a artist concept or a drawing of an evolved Starship that's even larger than version 3. And I think one of my questions would be, is version 3 the version is an iteration of version 3 going to be the version that actually goes to the moon with Artemis, or is there a version 4 or 5 down the road? We saw multiple block upgrades with Falcon 9, finally getting to Block 5 before that was the version that was certified for crew missions. Are we seeing the same thing with Starship, where all we know about officially right now is Block 1, 2, and 3? Is there a Block 4? Is there a Block 5? And when do those come online? And do they need more versions, newer versions beyond even version 3, to get to a point where it's human rated and can sustain itself in orbit for months or years, to get to the moon or Mars?
So many good questions, so much that he could possibly talk about, and we'll certainly talk more on the other side of the technical update. But for now, we're going to go ahead and say au revoir to our friend Stephen Clark. Appreciate you, Stephen. We'll check back in with you a little bit later.
Sounds great. Talk to you soon, Will.
All righty, buddy. Thanks. We're just now T-minus 2 hours, 4 minutes, 45 seconds and counting to the opening of the window for Starship Flight 10. For those who were here for Starship Flight 9, this will be a fairly similar operation, with the ship upper stage performing a similar suborbital flight with the intent for it to splash down safely and in a controlled manner in the Indian Ocean. SpaceX will not attempt to perform a catch of the Super Heavy booster back at the tower today. Instead, it will be doing some more off-nominal experiments that will require it to land out in the Gulf. SpaceX is using a less aggressive angle of attack for the booster as it comes back down following hot staging and the boost back burn. That was one of the problems it encountered that prevented a nominal landing burn last go around. This time they're going to, as they conclude the landing burn with the final 3 engines, use one of the center 2 engines like a normal landing would, but instead of using the 3 to conclude things, it'll look something like the configuration you see in the upper right-hand corner of this graphic here. This graphic designed by a really cool graphic designer named Vikrunta Jona, who was kind enough to let us use some of his graphics today, so really appreciate that, Vikrunta. And as you can see, the landing burn set to take place about from the T plus 6 minutes 20 second mark and last roughly 20 seconds in duration. Taking a look at our live chat right now, I want to thank channel member and moderator Jeff Hansen for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Jeff. Jeff says, go Starbase, go SpaceX, go Starship, Godspeed, S37 and B16. For those who weren't with us at the beginning of the broadcast, S37 or Ship 37 is the tail number for the upper stage, this Block 2 variant of the Starship upper stage, and B16 is Booster 16, the number for the Super Heavy booster that will kick things off in just about 2 hours from now. We're roughly 45 minutes away from the start of the fueling campaign, beginning with the SpaceX launch director of the day giving the call on whether or not they're go to begin prop load. We're also just about 30 minutes away from when SpaceX is set to perform a company talk that Stephen and I were just talking about. Still on track to begin at 6 p.m. Eastern, 2200 UTC for folks around the world. Of course, with every launch, we are keeping an eye on the weather. You can see, thanks to this satellite view of the clouds around southern Texas, it is a little bit cloudy offshore, not too bad right around the pad, but you can see some clouds bubbling up just south of the U.S.-Mexico border. Starship will head out due east once it leaves the pad here today. SpaceX suggested a 45% chance for favorable weather with its launch attempt today. That status was given yesterday, though, so conditions may have improved or hopefully not, but could have deteriorated between then and now. Taking a look back at our live chat, want to, as we were just talking about the Artemis program, want to thank one of our channel members named Artemis, no affiliation, I don't believe, who is very generous with gifting 50 Spaceflight Now memberships, and on top of that, a $100 super chat. Really appreciate all that generosity, Artemis. Thank you so much for supporting us at that level here at Spaceflight Now. And keeping true to form, the request for a Leroy Jacob, Jingleheimer Jenkins. Gotta admire the consistency. And thanks again to Artemis for yet another 50 Spaceflight Now memberships. So to the now 100 newest channel members of Spaceflight Now, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Artemis in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership beyond the month you were just gifted. And as a quick but necessary reminder, periodically, when someone gifts memberships, it is entirely random based off of YouTube's system as far as to whom the membership goes. So Artemis has no control over that. We have no control over that. But we certainly want to welcome in our newest channel members. As a reminder, channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. Also want to note Janine, marking 14 months with us, is a channel member at the pad leader level, who says, "Thanks everyone, great coverage always on Falcon 9 2. It's been a busy few days with a couple of Falcon 9 launches. Of course, we saw the flight of the X-37B military space plane from Launch Complex 39A on, was that Thursday night? That was followed this morning, my goodness, this morning by the launch of the CRS-33 mission, a cargo Dragon spacecraft that lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station at 2:45 a.m. this morning, and is making its way right now as we speak up to the International Space Station, with a docking at the forward port of the Harmony module scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. Eastern, 11:30 UTC for those around the world. And that brings us to, as SpaceX's Vice President of Launch, Kiko Donchev, described the main course for SpaceX Starship flight. Oh, and how could I forget, there was also a Starlink launch sandwiched between the X-37B mission and the CRS mission. That was thankfully covered by our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who performed both technical operations for that broadcast as well as commentator duties. And the reason that I was not on the mic for that mission is because I and actually John Pisani were busy at the Space Coast Symposium and Expo in Cape Canaveral, Florida, just down the road from the Space Force Station. It was a good opportunity for folks in the local non-space community to mix and mingle with a whole bunch of representatives who are related within the space industry, folks like Rob Long with Space Florida, as well as representatives from Via Space, based here on the Space Coast. ULA also represented. One of the main talks, though, that is germane to our launch coverage today was an appearance by Mr. Kiko Donchev, who spoke on a range of topics, sort of giving the highlights of SpaceX, discussing the Starlink program, Falcon Heavy, and human spaceflight. But of course, the part that is most relevant to the launch we're about to see were his comments regarding the Starship program. And so want to go to a video from that. So these are...
I can tell you, Kiko, that there were a lot of us that gathered together at Kennedy Space Center to watch that flight, and we were all cheering you on as you caught that first super heavy.
It's like catching a skyscraper with chopsticks, you know? You guys ever done that? Yeah, it's kind of hard. But we thought it was crazy too at the time, you know? When Elon pushed us and we're like, I don't know about this, but he's got a way sometimes of pushing us to do things and pushing us outside the envelope. And the way to think about, right, so like Falcon 9 launches and then lands on a drone ship, sometimes it comes back to land, but that's not like an airplane. An airplane launches and takes off and lands on the same runway, right? And so if we have to land in a different place from the launch pad, then we're not truly going to become aircraft-like, right? So the reason we build an architecture where you end up landing in the same place you launch from is like that is how you create a reusable system. Why is reusability important? That's how you drastically reduce the cost of access to space and then increase the amount of payload you can take to orbit. And you know, if you look through the history of time, every time civilization figures out a way to move goods and people at a drastically reduced amount of money or a drastically reduced amount of effort, huge leaps in civilization happen, right? Think about Oregon Trail. It used to be a pain in the butt to go to the West Coast. Build a railroad, all of a sudden go, you know, the California boom, right? You look at the interstate highways. You look at going from sail ships to steamships, right? Even the Silk Road, if you think way back. So when humans figure out how to move things easier and cheaper, we generally prosper. And now, look, it's not all positive. Sometimes there's negatives, but generally the positives outweigh the negatives, and society becomes better for it. And that's why we're building Starship, is to create a truly rapidly reusable, fully rapidly reusable launch vehicle. Because if we're able to reduce that barrier to entry, reduce the cost, really, and the thing we're optimizing is cost per ton to the surface of Mars, we're going to completely create an entirely new economy that a lot of people we haven't even dreamed of yet. And I think humans, society, and Earth be better for it. So the bulk of the development of Starship is happening in South Texas, in Brownsville, Texas. We have a town called Starbase there. The first really ever orbital commercial spaceport is there. That's where all of our test flights have happened, just the ship test flights and now our orbital test flights. But as we stabilize that rocket, we're going to operationalize it, and we're going to bring it to Florida. So we're working on 2 separate environmental impact statements, sort of huge environmental studies, both at KSC for using Starship out of 39A, and on the Space Force side at 37, which is the former Delta Heavy pad. So we've gone through a very lengthy process. It's actually been, there's some thought like we're just kind of rushing into the Starship in Florida thing, but we've actually been working on this problem for maybe 6 or 7 years now. And I see Janet's in the room here. We stopped and started and stopped and started, and through our partnership with both NASA and the Space Force, we cut no corners. We're doing the long environmental studies, and we're making sure that when we bring this rocket here, we're ready in a way that is helpful to the community and to the other operators. There is some fear. Oh my God, Starship is going to shut down everything else that's happening at the Cape. That's not true. Sure, is it a big rocket? Yes, it's bigger than Falcon 9, bigger than Falcon Heavy. Actually, it's the world's biggest rocket ever built. But we've done a lot of work to basically figure out how we shrink the impact. SpaceX believes that the best spaceport is a spaceport that and not saying it will happen like this, but that multiple launch providers could launch multiple times a day. Like, we want to help the DoD and KSC design a spaceport where, it's not just SpaceX, right? We want Blue Origin, we want Relativity, we want ULA, we want all these new entrants, we want Stoke to come in and be prosperous and be successful. And fundamentally, the spaceport is capable of handling that. Physics says it is. It's just how do we figure out how we work together and how we deconflict, and then actually go do some hard math and some hard engineering to make that happen. I think we've got a really good plan. I think we've got a really good plan working with our partners, and it's going to be very, very exciting to watch the first launch of Starship from Florida.
It will be. And I think it's also exciting from the NASA perspective what this will bring to the Artemis program as well, and landing eventually our astronauts on the surface of the moon.
Yeah, HLS is the human landing system, right, is a huge priority of ours. We got to help NASA achieve that goal of landing on the surface of the moon, right? So we're on contract to basically do a transfer of the astronauts from Orion, once it's in lunar orbit, to a Starship, and then use the ship to actually go land on the surface of the moon. That tech will be really important and key, and same stuff that it's going to take to achieve that goal is also going to enable the Mars goals, right? The big leap is you got to refuel on orbit, right? So this idea that you'll launch a ship, and then you'll launch another ship, and then you aggregate propellant, right? And that lets you get enough energy to then move a ship, do the entire landing sequence. But over time, that same exact architecture is like the needed game changer for actually sending a ton of stuff to Mars and being able to not just land, a rover, but land like 1,000 tons, 100, many tons to the surface of Mars. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so with all you've had some challenges, of course, but we have something in our office that Janet has in her office that says you can do hard things. Space is incredibly hard. It's probably the hardest thing that we're trying to achieve as human beings. So can you talk a little bit about like the iterations you've seen with Starship and with this next launch coming up as well.
Yes, yes. No, I mean, we have definitely had some challenges in Starbase. We've had a lot of successes. None of us, we thought it was real low likelihood we were going to catch that booster on Flight 5. But, you know, SpaceX's approach is to fly and to test and to do, right? It's always been our approach. It's like, how do we, because you learn, rockets are, you could do a lot of analysis, you could do a lot of upfront design work, you could do a lot of things on paper, but until you fly the rocket, you don't learn. That's like the reality of the situation. And our process has always been that you learn the most through flight, so how do we get to that next flight as soon as possible? And because we've been able to really develop Starship on our own, right? We've funded it. We've definitely got some funding from NASA for HLS, but the majority of the capital investment that is Starship has been SpaceX funded. And because of that, we haven't necessarily had primary payloads on our vehicles like we had on Falcon up front, where like we were getting contracts, right? We've been able to really push the envelope to see like how do we develop this rocket iteratively and know that it's okay to fail. It's okay to break things, as long as we're safe, you know, and are good stewards with if we have a problem that we go handle our business, right, and clean up our business. As long as we do those things, right, we can learn this way, and it's okay to fail. You know, I think people forget what the 60s were like and the 50s around here. Like, I don't know, I clearly wasn't around, but I see videos and I hear stories, and there are a lot of failure happening when we're really pushing, right? And I think it is part of the process. You know, it's okay to fail if you can do it safely and no one gets hurt. It's not cheap. Don't get me wrong. We don't like blowing up rockets. It's certainly never a priority of ours. But every time that happens, we learn and we get better. And, you know, never has there been a case where a rocket that has going to have been at this size and at this scale that's been tested and flown as many times as it has will actually come to Florida for the first time. That's never happened. It's usually Florida is the test range, right? Like Florida is where, like the New Glenn, Artemis, all these rockets, they launch here for the first time, right? Even Falcon. That's not going to be the case with Starship. Starship, you're going to get a vetted machine that shows up, you know, ready to party.
Well, thanks for sharing all of that, Kiko. I think we're coming to the end of our time together, but I think we do have one last slide. And I just want you to, there we go. I want you to take a look at it. This is a cool picture, and I just want to hear from you what you think the next 20 years are going to look like in space exploration, and what does this mean to you? Yeah,
you know, this kid, this picture always means a lot to me, because I have two little kids. I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. My 5-year-old just started kindergarten at Freedom 7. So, you know, my kids were born in Cape Canaveral Hospital. The Cocoa Beach is their home, and we read Goodnight. I grew up in Michigan, right? So they do read Goodnight Michigan and Goodnight Florida. Go Blue. For
Go
anyone
green.
That's from, there's got to be some Midwest people in this. Oh no, there we go. Yay. In the back there. Devin went to Michigan State, right? So, you know, it's like, but I swear there's a lot of Midwest implants in this town. So, which is maybe why I like it. Yeah, so much. So anyways, I read to my kid, and the idea that there's a future in which we are on Mars reading Goodnight Earth is like, gives me all the feels. And I'm happy to be a part of it. You know, like I said, it's a true honor to work with the great humans in this community, the great people, the great partners at NASA and the Space Force, and we're not gonna let you down. We're gonna do it right, and it's gonna be a plus. So, thank you guys for your time. It's your honor.
Thanks, Kiko.
And again, a big thanks to the folks at the Palm Bay Chamber of Commerce for hosting the 7th Space Coast Symposium and Expo and bringing in excellent speakers like Kiko Donchev to offer some insights into stuff that a lot of folks have interest in, Starship being high among them. Of course, for us here on the Space Coast, this is an important week for consideration of the Starship program. There are a series of public meetings that are being hosted by the Federal Aviation Administration. couple of them are going to be happening here in person, with the first two coming up at the Astronauts Memorial Foundation at the Center for Space Education Conference Center. That's part of the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex here on Merritt Island. That's on, again, Tuesday, August 26th. The first is from 1 to 3, the second from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. Next pair of in-person meetings coming up on Thursday, August 28th. Again at 1 to 3 p.m. and then 6 to 8 p.m. This time at the Radisson Conference Center at the Grand Caribbean. That's on Astronaut Boulevard in Cape Canaveral. And for those who want to participate and lend your voice, should also note that this particular set of meetings is discussing Starship operations from Launch Complex 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. A draft environmental impact statement was published by the FAA with obviously a lot of input from SpaceX laying out their plans for Starship operations here. SpaceX is proposing for up to 44 Starship and Super Heavy launches and up to 44 landings at LC-39A. There's also a series of static fire tests that they would want to be able to perform both with the Super Heavy booster as well as the ship upper stage, all of which are going to require dozens of days potentially of closures for Playa Linda Beach as things are laid out right now, as well as the environmental impacts that are laid out in the draft EIS. You can check that out right now on the FAA's website. We've also done some reporting on our website, spaceflightnow.com, both at Pad 39A as well as the environmental work that Kiko mentioned that's being done over at Space Launch Complex 37, the former home of the Delta IV Heavy rocket from United Launch Alliance. Here's a graphic that shows an artist's rendering of what what Slick 37 may look like in the not too distant future. Sort of similar to what we see here at Starbase right now with the two launch and catch towers that'll be designed to support dozens of Starship flights from this launch complex. If you're not able to attend the in-person meetings, the virtual meeting regarding Pad 39A is coming up on Wednesday, September 3rd from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern. And folks can offer public comment on the Pad 39A proposal through September 22nd of this year. Final environmental impact statement is expected on Pad 39A sometime in the fall time frame, which is around the time that we should also hear about the results of the environmental study that's being overseen by the Department of the Air Force concerning Space Launch Complex 37. As a reminder, we're now just about 10 minutes away from the planned beginning of the SpaceX Starship technical talk. Set to begin at the top of the hour here. In addition to Elon Musk, it sounds like we will also be hearing from We should also be hearing from Bill Riley, who is the Vice President of Starship Engineering for SpaceX. He reposted the SpaceX link on X to the company talk, saying that, quote, he's always excited to talk Starship, end quote. So as we may hear a number of high-level comments, likely getting into some of the weeds from Elon Musk, it's also exciting to potentially be hearing from the Vice President specifically of Starship Engineering in that talk again, which is set to begin now in 9 minutes. if everything is still on track for a start for that at 6 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, as far as the progress towards the launch of Starship Flight 10, we're currently T-minus 1 hour, 38 minutes, 38 seconds, and counting before the opening of the window. In just about an hour or so, we should be getting some additional pad level views of the Starship rocket and some of those wonderful drone shots from SpaceX as well. Taking a look at the chat, want to thank the more than 3,100 of you who are watching along with us live today. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank a few folks in the chat. So we're hearing some seagull sounds in the background. Of course, this launch complex for SpaceX is right along the Gulf waters. Some different avian activity than we're used to hearing here on the Space Coast. It's part of the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. Back to the chat, Rocket Prophet's been a member with us now for 30 months, coming up on 3 years. Rocket Prophet says, let's go to orbit. Well, not quite. This is, once again, a suborbital mission. So, SpaceX not intending to achieve orbital velocity with its Starship and won't make a full orbit around the Earth. That eventually will be the intent, is to have ship return back here to Starbase and be caught by the other tower, Tower B. And perhaps during the technical talk coming up here in just a little bit, we'll get a little more insight into when SpaceX is going to be rolling out version 3 of the ship upper stage and when the first catch of ship is expected. Janine referencing my forgetfulness of the Starlink 17-6 mission, saying there was a lot to remember with all the launches. And that is the gospel truth. Artemis back again with another 50 Spaceflight Now memberships gifted. My goodness, Artemis, thank you so much for that. And thanks for another $50 super chat. Questioning Leroy Jenkins. Thanks, Artemis. Appreciate you. And thank you for your ongoing support of what we do here at Spaceflight Now, especially on big launch days such as we have here with Starship Flight 10, looking for a liftoff in just about an hour and a half from now. Time now T-minus 1 hour, 34 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. As we're awaiting the opening of the window for Starship Flight 10, let's take a moment, step back in time and talk about the launch history for the Starship program, going back to Flight 1. Slipped it off on April 20th back in 2023. And how far they've come since. Flight number 2 was on November 18th of that year. As SpaceX continued to progress with these missions, it was Of course, Flight 5 with one of the biggest marquee moments of the program so far, the first time that SpaceX was able to catch a super heavy booster with the chopstick arms there, known as Mechazilla, the launch tower. Moving on, Flight 7 marked the first launch of a Block 2 version of the Starship upper stage. And unfortunately for SpaceX, it has been challenging to get this version of Starship to achieve the milestones that it had succeeded with in the previous flights. Of course, SpaceX continuing to iterate on its design for both the ship upper stage as well as the super heavy booster. So it took the learnings from Flight 7, folded them into Flight 8, and didn't have a repeat of the same anomalies, which we've detailed for you both on our website, spaceflightnow.com, as well as in a recently posted video here on the YouTube channel. So won't retread over ground too much here, but the mission ended in a similar time frame in Flight 8 as it did with Flight 7, unsuccessful in performing the initial ascent burn. That changed with Flight 9 as SpaceX was able to get through that full ascent burn, but then ran into attitude control issues with the ship upper stage, and they weren't able to do the planned venting from the nose cone area of the ship. Problems cascaded from one to another. SpaceX was unable to perform the both deployment of the Starlink simulators that were on board this particular ship, that was Ship 35, and it also was unable to perform the Raptor relight demo. And with a loss of attitude, it performed an uncontrolled entry and splashdown in the waters of the Indian Ocean ultimately. But the flight plan, again, looking very similar with this mission. SpaceX going to be performing controlled hot staging maneuver with some of those vents on the hot staging ring closed off so that SpaceX can more deliberately control the direction that the booster separates from the upper stage and save some propellant. And the idea is getting learnings from this will allow them to not have to hold as much propellant in reserve for the boost back burn and use some more to get more up mass into orbit on future orbital missions. Following the boost back burn, the super heavy booster will then jettison the hot staging ring about 3 minutes and 40 seconds into flight. It will then perform the landing burn, lasting about 20 or so seconds in total, and ending up by using 2 of the 3 center engines, which would be nominal to use 3. But SpaceX is going to be looking to see if it can perform a successful off-nominal landing, if that makes sense. Essentially, like you see in the graphic in the upper right-hand corner of this box, using one of the middle rings instead of just the 3 center rings to perform that landing burn. We'll come back into talking about this here in just a second. Just want to check in if I'm seeing this correctly. It looks like the Technical Talk Spaces has been canceled, at least if you click on the link that was made available by SpaceX earlier, so it's unclear if they're moving to a different format or if the talk has actually been canceled. We're going to work to see if we can get an answer for you on that in the next minute or so here. just past the top of the hour here. For those of you who are just now joining us, SpaceX was expected to hold a technical talk on Starship that was going to be initially beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, then was moved to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and now if you click on the link on the SpaceX profile on X, it now says it has been canceled, at least in Space's format. We'll have to wait and see if SpaceX is actually planning to fold it into their coverage once they start their live stream, which is set to begin in about just about an hour from now. But this is not unsimilar or dissimilar from what we saw last time with Starship Flight 9, where SpaceX had announced that Elon Musk was going to be giving a company talk in the run-up to Starship Flight 9. And the day of, SpaceX made a similar post announcing it and then took that down. And then that talk, the talk of the talk went away until after Flight 9 actually happened. And then SpaceX posted a pre-recorded video of Elon Musk speaking to some SpaceX employees to their X account after the launch was all done and dusted. So there's precedence for this. That may be the route that SpaceX is going this time around. We'll have to wait and see. Currently T-minus 1 hour, 27 minutes, 2 seconds, and counting to the opening of the window for Starship Flight 10. Local time now 6:11 here on the East Coast, 5:11 there in Central Time Zone. We do have a new T0 for the Starship mission. We're now looking at a liftoff at 7:50 Eastern Time, 7:50 Eastern Time, 6:50 UTC, or excuse me, 6:50 Central, 23:50 UTC. So pushed back by about 20 minutes into the 1 hour long window that SpaceX has available for them today. As you see, our countdown clock in the upper right hand corner of the screen has been adjusted accordingly. Things currently stand for T minus 1 hour, 37 minutes, 42 seconds, and counting. It's unclear if the adjustment to the T0 was or is related to something being troubleshooted with the rocket, or if the weather, which was 45% favorable coming into today's launch attempt, may be a little problematic at this point. SpaceX has not commented, so we don't know with 100% certainty the reason for the adjustment. But with a shift in the T0, now's as good a time as any to refresh on the countdown timeline for today's mission, especially for folks that were not with us the first go-around. Things will kick into gear at T minus 1 hour and 15 minutes before the planned liftoff. The SpaceX launch director will make the go for a prop load, and once that go ahead is given, SpaceX will begin by fueling the ship upper stage with liquid methane. A little bit different than the previous flights of the Block 2 variant, where SpaceX has begun with LOX load on the ship upper stage, going back to starting with the fuel instead. And at T minus 45 minutes and 20 seconds is when LOX load on the ship upper stage will begin. Moving right along, T minus 41 minutes, 37 seconds, SpaceX will start to tank the Super Heavy booster down below and start to flow the liquid oxygen on board the Super Heavy booster, booster 16, at T minus 35 minutes and 52 seconds. 19 minutes, 40 seconds before flight, the Raptor chill down will begin on both the ship and the Super Heavy booster simultaneously. A little bit different than we see with a Falcon 9 launch, where they'll chill the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 booster before flight and then shift to the MVAC chill sequence about a minute and a half post liftoff. Here they do both simultaneously on the ground, since the Raptor engines, both the sea level and the vacuum version of the Raptor, will pivot to hot staging fairly quickly into the flight. Fueling will continue on until T minus 3 hours and 20 minutes before liftoff. Excuse me, 3 minutes and 20 seconds before liftoff. That'll be followed by booster prop load wrapping up at T minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds. 30 seconds out, the SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch call. The flame deflector is activated 10 seconds before before T0. Once the flame deflector is activated, if there is an issue with either the weather, the rocket, or the range, SpaceX would need to stand down for, we believe, at least a day before they are able to attempt another launch, since they have to refill the deluge water tanks. The Raptor engine ignition sequence begins at T minus 3 seconds, and then at T0, SpaceX likes to say, excitement is guaranteed. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 25 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. Appreciate the nearly 5,200 of you who are watching along with us live. If you're just now checking in, this is Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starship Flight 10 mission from Starbase, Texas. You're looking at a live view of the 400-foot tall plus rocket, courtesy of our friends at Lab Padre. For those who weren't with us earlier on or saw our post on X, SpaceX has adjusted the T0 for today's Starship flight. Now looking for a departure from Pad A at 6:50 p.m. Central Time, 7:50 p.m. Eastern, 23:50 UTC for our friends joining around the world. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Just to address a question on X, yes, this is from Starbase in Texas, not from Florida or California. Though SpaceX does have big plans for Starship operations here in the Sunshine State. Taking a live peek back here, just across the way from our office here at the Launch Complex 39A press site at the Kennedy Space Center. Activity continues on in the development of that Starship tower that you see in between the Falcon pad on the left-hand side of your screen and the hangar, the horizontal integration facility that SpaceX uses on the right with the SpaceX logo and the American flag. Any point in time when you check into our 24-hour stream launch pad live, you can see plenty of crane activity as work continues on feverishly at that Starship tower. In fact, right now, SpaceX is going through an environmental review process in coordination with the Federal Aviation Administration in order to progress into the ability to launch its Starship rocket from Pad 39A up to 44 times per year here at this launch complex, up to 77 times from Space Launch Complex 37 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where they're planning to have a couple of towers. Here's a closer look up at the work that's underway here. If you weren't with us earlier in the broadcast, SpaceX and, well, the FAA is hosting a pair of in-person meetings to talk about the project here, proposing 44 launches at max right now for Starship Super Heavy at Launch Complex 39A. Those meetings are on Tuesday the 26th and Thursday the 28th at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex for the Tuesday meetings and at the Radisson Conference Center in Cape Canaveral on Thursday. For those not in Central Florida or not going to be in Central Florida at the time, there's also a virtual meeting on Zoom that's coming up on Wednesday, September 3rd. Public comment is open through September 22nd in response to the draft impact statement. One bit of infrastructure that has been cleared to proceed, and SpaceX is very much in motion on this one, is the addition of a gigabay that is going to be added here adjacent to SpaceX's Hangar X site here at the Kennedy Space Center. That will allow for processing of both, as you can see, the Starship on the right and the Super Heavy booster on the left. This is obviously an artist's interpretation of what the Gigabay complex will look like. SpaceX has been busily laying the literal and figurative groundwork for this throughout the course of the year, and for those who work at the spaceport, you'll undoubtedly recall seeing a number of concrete moving trucks that have been bringing concrete to pour for the foundation. for this operation. We do have a new T0, it appears. Looks like a slight adjustment, but in the opposite direction now. Looking like 7:45 p.m. Eastern, 6:45 p.m. Central, 23:45 UTC. Don't often see a countdown clock move to the left, but it is certainly not entirely out of the realm of possibility. So at this point, assuming that new time is correct, we are at the point in which the SpaceX launch director is making the call on the start of prop load today. We are starting to see the beginnings of venting from the tower there at Pad A, as well as some additional venting from one of the vertical stacks there at the propellant farm. This is part of the signs that we look for ahead of the start of the fueling campaign for the ship upper stage. As a reminder, unlike the last few launches of Starship, SpaceX is instead going to be beginning with fuel load on the ship upper stage as opposed to LOX load. You can see that vent from this camera's perspective over on South Padre Island. First big fueling milestone once the go-ahead was given. That'll happen at T-minus 53 minutes. That's when liquid methane will start to flow on board the ship upper stage. Time now, T-minus 1 hour, 8 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. We're just taking a look now, once again, at the weather situation as imaged by the GOES East satellite, looking at the cloud cover over southern Texas. You can see towards the end of this cycle those clouds that are bubbling up in the area over Starbase, Texas, adjacent to Boca Chica Beach. Coming into this launch opportunity, SpaceX said that they were looking at a forecast that presented with a 45% chance for favorable weather today. Those weather comments were issued yesterday, though, so don't have a today forecast, unfortunately, but hopefully once SpaceX begins their live stream, they'll start fairly early on with an update of the weather so that we all have a clearer idea of what their prospects are from a meteorological standpoint. You can see with these two vents both in motion right now, SpaceX is preparing for loading both liquid oxygen as well as liquid methane on board ship and the super heavy booster. Of course, the venting is connected to the oxygen feed lines. Somewhat similar to the fueling of a Falcon 9 rocket, where we see SpaceX chill the feed lines at either Pad 40, Pad 39A, or Pad 4 East out at Vandenberg. They do so in order to make sure they're at the right thermal temperatures ahead of tanking the Falcon 9 rocket with liquid oxygen. Super cold, densified liquid oxygen. With just an hour, 6 minutes, 28 seconds remaining on the clock, we want to welcome in our friend once again, Mr. Stephen Clark, space reporter with Ars Technica and Spaceflight Now alum, former editor here at our publication. Welcome back, Stephen.
Hey, Will. Happy to be back.
Happy to have you back. Of course, we were hoping that when you rejoined us, we would be able to talk about all of the many things that we learned from SpaceX about Starship, and, well, things went as things went, which is not entirely unforeseen, but slightly disappointing.
Right. Of course, the list of things I rattled off earlier, the things I'd like to know, still stands.
Oh, of course, nothing changed from what we want from a future company talk, just the timing is very much thrown into question, whether we'll see it folded into the SpaceX broadcast or if they'll do a repeat of Flight 9 and record something and then post it after Flight 10 actually happens this go around. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose.
Right. It may depend on the outcome of tonight's launch. We'll see.
Yes, indeed. You know, among the things that we were talking about, obviously chief among them was the impact for the Starship rocket on the Artemis 3 timeline. Stephen Young in the background, if we can go to the video number 2, get that pulled up. This is from a recent talk that happened as part of an advisory committee with the national academies, talking about the milestones ahead for Artemis 3, what has been achieved, what is still ahead of them. So want to go ahead and go to this tape and listen into Lori Glaze's comments here. And on the other side, Stephen will get your thoughts on what she has to say both about Starship in the context of Artemis 3, as well as some of the other milestones that she discusses. So let's go ahead and listen in. This is NASA's Lori Glaze.
With the blue boxes being things that are brand new for Artemis 3 that we've not tested before. They'll be new in this case. Anything in the yellow highlight is fiscal year 25, and anything in the orange highlight is planned for fiscal year 2026. So you can see a lot of anticipated progress in 2026. I'll show you, there's about 3 boxes there left for 2025. I know it's probably small font. I'll tell you the couple that are coming up, we think very soon. The Orion docking module is one of those next boxes. The docking module has completed its work down at Kennedy Space Center in the ONC building and was shipped to Denver back in June so that it could begin its proto-qual testing out at Lockheed Martin. When that testing is complete, the docking module will return to Kennedy Space Center, where it will be permanently installed on the Orion crew module for Artemis 3. And we anticipate that docking module to be ready for the crew module, that integration step, in about the November timeframe of this year. Also on the list there is the Orion stage adapter. This is the piece that would connect it to the rocket, and that's forecast for delivery in September of this year, September 2025, which is a little earlier than the need date. In fact, I think it's about a year earlier than the need date. So there are some things that happen earlier than scheduled. You'll see, of course, the box at the bottom, not to be missed. Those are the Starship milestones. As you know, I know we spoke a little earlier, but also speaking to the HLS, I think we've all been watching carefully as SpaceX has attempted their last several launches, not going quite to plan. The key milestone that we are watching for, and everyone is watching for, is when will they be able to demonstrate the cryogenic propulsion transfer? As we know, this is a very challenging thing to do, and we were anticipating that would be completed by this year. Clearly, that is slipping. So we are anxiously watching for their next launch to see if they're, how they're making progress towards achieving that particular milestone. Some more hardware photos here to show you kind of where we are on Artemis 3 with hardware. The top two, let's see, on the left here, we've got the interim cryogenic propulsion stage, which completed its testing and checkout actually quite a while ago. You can also see in September of 2024, the European service module for Artemis 3 was delivered back in September and has been joined with the crew module adapter back in September. On the bottom left, you can see the engine section for the core stage secured down at Kennedy Space Center. And you can also see there next to it the liquid oxygen tank for core stage after it had completed the leak-proof testing of the welds. The center two images there are of our crew members wearing Axiom design pressure suits, the spacesuits, interacting with the full-scale replica of the Starship elevator and the airlock, just testing out how those systems are going to work with each other. You can see the Starship 9 launch there next to that. Again, awaiting Starship 10 launch. We're anticipating, or what we hear from SpaceX is they're looking towards sometime in August for that Flight 10. And in the far right column at the very top, kind of tiny up there, but that's the first power on of the Orion 3 crew module, the power on for their test computers, power and data units. You can also see in the middle there the launch vehicle stage adapter. It's complete and ready for transport. That was just a photo back from March. And then down on the bottom right is the liquid hydrogen tank for core stage for Artemis 3. That was down at the Michoud Assembly Facility just after the thermal protections had been sprayed on there. We actually got to see it very shortly thereafter when we visited MAF, and there's really good progress being made there on the core stage elements. Again, on the crew for Artemis 3, we don't have a specific crew selected yet, but there's a lot of activity in preparation for what the crew will need to do on the surface. On the far left, you can see some some crew in the Axiom space suits, in their suits, practicing science operations and assessing the capabilities of the suit. I'm trying to make modifications where there may be some things that don't work quite the way they would like. And then what you see on the far right are the Axiom astronauts and NASA spacesuit engineers conducting spacesuit testing in the neutral buoyancy lab down at Johnson Space Center. So that was the first test that took place a few weeks ago. I think July 9th was the first time down into the NBL testing the suit in a simulated 16G environment. In the middle there, you can see testing of one of the science payload instruments, the seismometers that will be deployed as part of Artemis 3. So you can see some of the testing going on there, making really good progress on those science payloads.
Just under 58 minutes to go with the planned flight, current T0 of 6:45 p.m. Central Time, 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 23:45 UTC. And the latest update from SpaceX is that the Starship team has pulled go for prop load, which means we're just a few minutes away from fueling beginning on the 400-plus foot tall rocket, starting with liquid methane at T-minus 53 minutes, followed by LOX on the ship upper stage at T-minus 45 minutes and 20 seconds. Stephen, coming back to you, there was quite a bit in Lori Glaze's update. And for those out there, Lori Glaze is the acting associate administrator for the Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate. It's a mouthful. There was lots that she just covered. What were some of the things that stood out to you as far as milestones accomplished, milestones still ahead for this mission that is supposed to launch in mid-2027?
Quite a lot to go through there. I think that the sheer volume of milestones still to come was kind of mind-boggling. I guess the things that stand out to me are readiness of Starship and the readiness of the suits, the commercial Axiom spacesuits for Artemis 3 that will actually be protecting the astronauts as they walk on the moon. If you divided, if that had only been a presentation about Starship or only about the suits, I think there would have been an equally number of sub-milestones in each of one of those categories that she could have gone through over the same period of time. So those are the two things that really stand out to me as being the long pole, so to speak, or the pacing item in NASA speak of what's driving the schedule for Artemis 3. Of course, I don't want to be remiss about, I don't want to, NASA shouldn't rest on their laurels about the readiness for the Space Launch System or the Orion spacecraft either. However, those two vehicles look to be on track for the Artemis 2 mission, fly around the far side of the moon early next year. But I wouldn't be counting on those being ready in 2027 either until we get through Artemis 2 and see how that critical test flight goes as well. So I think three big things that stand out to me then are suits, Starship, and is Artemis 2 successful? And those are the three things that really will be driving the schedule. Will they be ready in mid-2027? I highly doubt it. When they'll be ready, I wouldn't even want to speculate or venture a guess at this point. I would say still a good chance of happening before 2030. But other than that, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Really impossible to even speculate at this point of when Artemis 3 might be ready to fly. One thing I'll point out, though, Will, is last year we were hearing some rumblings from within NASA, unofficially, through some sources, that NASA leadership was discussing and evaluating different scenarios for an alternative Artemis 3 mission that would not land on the moon if suits weren't ready, if Starship wasn't ready to go to the moon, where they didn't want to be in a situation where Artemis 2 could launch potentially early next year and then have to wait 3, 4, 5 years for Artemis 3, for the next Artemis mission. They would want to, if they have an SLS and an Orion ready, do something else in that time period, whether it's do something that involves Gateway. Of course, the future of Gateway is now in question, or potentially rendezvous like a low Earth orbit mission or high Earth orbit mission, similar to, for the space history aficionados, similar to something like they did with Apollo 9, where you dock the lander and the crew module of Orion in orbit and do some checkouts in Earth orbit before sending the entire stack out to the moon on a future mission. But we haven't heard any of that recently. With the administration change, it's really the details have eluded us over the last few months, as I think the administration is really kind of discussing what their alternatives are, their options are. Do they not even want to entertain that as a possibility right now because it's moon or bust, or are those conversations still going on behind the scenes, but people have clammed up and aren't talking about it? Not sure the answer to that question.
Of course, that is still a question, but we are just now passing the 53-minute mark, so just noting for the audience at home, at this point, SpaceX should now be in the mode of loading liquid methane on the ship upper stage. And coming up next will be the start of LOX load at T-minus 45 minutes and 20 seconds. Going back to what you just said, Stephen, just picking up on that last line of thinking there. I mean, the most we've really heard from the administrator, the acting administrator, Sean Duffy, who is also the Secretary of Transportation, was that in talking with SpaceX, he told some folks at the NASA social event for Crew 11 that Gwen Shotwell told him that SpaceX would not be the showstopper for Artemis 3 launching in 2027, but, we really haven't had any super granular technical detail on, the things that give NASA and SpaceX confidence that that timeline is still able to be preserved from just the HLS perspective alone. One of the folks who was part of the committee that we just heard from in the conversation with Lori Glaze asked after she made those comments, what are the timeline milestones that you're working toward that would allow for a mid-2027 Artemis 3 launch to continue to move forward as expected in that time frame. And she said that was something that she could provide to the committee, but it's unclear if we, the public, are going to be seeing, some of those detailed milestones, which I think would both answer a lot of our questions as far as what NASA is watching for and when things need to happen, and may also put some, minds at ease if we just have some type of tangibility around, okay, we need to see X from SpaceX by Y date, and we just don't have that right now, so we're really just left to do an unfortunate amount of speculation.
100% agree, Will. I think NASA could do a much better job of sharing information and being more transparent, as could their contractors, whether it's SpaceX or Boeing or on any number of programs, or Axiom with the suits, any number of programs. I think these are all fair questions to ask, and we've seen it, in my opinion, in my view, we've seen a trend, in the last few years of for example, last year, what I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the discussion of alternative missions. Well, that's something willing to speak about publicly, what those alternative missions were, even though some of the alternatives are clear. And this year it hasn't gotten any better. With the change in administration, and the vacuum of leadership at the top of NASA hasn't helped matters either. So, I think NASA and their contractors could do a much better job, because these are all fair questions to ask, and since taxpayers are funding this program, I think they owe the citizens answers to some of these questions, especially as it appears as if China is really making a run at 2030 for their own lunar landing, and some Americans may not care, some may be very upset by that, but it naturally prompts questions, and hopefully very soon NASA will have a full-time administrator, and maybe that person will be empowered to speak a little more clearly about what these future plans are. We've heard Sean Duffy mention mid-2027, and that's what he's getting from SpaceX. Really doesn't. It's not much different from what NASA officials were saying last year and in the previous administration. They were saying mid-2027 and weren't willing to really entertain or discuss any alternative missions or possibility of delay. And I think it's just time to be more realistic.
That is all very true, and as we're now on the cusp of, as NASA announced, a new astronaut class coming to the fore. The third week, I believe, of September is when they're going to announce them to the public down at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We still, as Lori Glaze said, don't have an announced Artemis 3 quartet, which you would think for a mission as dynamic as a moon landing, I have to imagine that they've at least down-selected to some group that is maybe doing some more selective training or, is starting to get into the mode, since I would imagine you would want to have the maximum amount of time to get that crew both mentally and physically prepared for the undertaking of, going on board Orion as the next 4 humans, a total of 8, and then being the first 4 potentially to be inside a crewed Starship vehicle, in lunar orbit. That we should hear, I would think, some announcement of that in the coming months, but perhaps not if in reality there is a much longer delay coming, as you were suggesting there might be.
Right. Well, and the only thing I would say to that is a lot of the training, if there was a crew selected today, a lot of the training they would be undergoing early on would be academic, because the details of what the interior of Starship is going to be like, what kind of controls they're going to have, what suits, the configuration of the suits they're going to wear, all could change as both of all these programs move through their testing and different iterations of ships and suits come online. So, if there was a crew selected, there would only be a certain amount of training they could do at this point.
That's true. Although if you want to put on your detective hat and do some sleuthing based off of the bits that we've seen from NASA of the various components of training that are starting to come together, maybe we're looking at Rajachari being a part of that. I know he's been a part of a number of teams that have been involved with the development of the astronaut interface within the astronaut office for the HLS version of Starship. He was also just recently up in, I believe it was Alaska, where they were working on some helicopter training that will loop in to training that's part of the landing profile for once the astronauts cross over from Orion into Starship and make their descent to the lunar surface. He's been a part of that training. Maybe you could see a Kate Rubins, who's also a geologist, coming into the picture here, since it's been a while since she's flown, and I don't believe she's at the limit of how much radiation she can be exposed to as a NASA astronaut. So, you have to imagine there may be at least one international astronaut from, whether that's the European Space Agency or from JAXA, from Japan. But I think those are potentially two good candidates if they're not, selected by NASA but not officially announced, that they would be at least high in contention, just based off of the little that we're seeing.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with Rajachari. He's now Brigadier General Rajachari in the. I'm not sure if he's transitioned to the Space Force, if he's still in the Air Force, but Brigadier General. He would be the first general officer since maybe Tom Stafford to fly in space. Stephen might need to fact check me on that there, but and of course in his Air Force career, he was the director of F-35 flight testing across the service. So great experience testing new vehicles. Kate Rubins, though, just retired from NASA a few weeks ago. So,
you're right. That's a good point.
So I had to look that up. I didn't know that off the top of my head either. But she's now left the agency. But plenty of other very qualified candidates that I can think of who could fly on Artemis 3 as well. And I agree with your assessment that an international astronaut would make sense, but we'll see.
And we do have an update from SpaceX that propellant load of the Super Heavy booster now underway, which, according to their posted timeline, would be a little bit ahead of schedule. Currently T-minus 43 minutes, 40 seconds and counting, so we're, according to the SpaceX timeline, we should just be a couple minutes into ship LOX load, with booster fuel load beginning in the next couple of minutes at T-minus 41 minutes and 37 seconds. But certainly encouraging signs that tanking continues on as expected at this point, and that we should start to get some camera views from SpaceX in the next about 15 minutes or so. Taking a look at one of the live cameras from Lab Padre, and we'll come to this in just a second once things are framed up. As you see at the, well, now just out of frame, unfortunately, but that slot, which SpaceX folks like to call the Pez dispenser, potentially going to be coming into use as SpaceX wants to perform a demonstration of deploying simulator Starlinks. This time would be the first that we've seen SpaceX be able to accomplish that milestone, if in fact they're able to A, get that far in this flight, and B, not have an anomaly that precludes that deployment. I think our friends at Lab Padre are aligning the cameras to try to get a bead on the frost line forming as the both liquid methane and liquid oxygen are now flowing on board the ship upper stage, and we're coming up to the start of booster fueling as well, but right now we're looking at ship 37. It's a little hard to see just at this moment, but we'll keep tabs on it. For those who are just joining us or have joined us within the last couple of minutes, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of Starship Flight 10. As the name suggests, this is the 10th integrated test flight of the more than 400-foot tall rocket set to lift off from Starbase, Texas at Pad A. as you can see, we've got a chopper moving in the background of the shot from South Padre Island. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, we do appear to be in a hold that had the clock frozen at T-minus 39 minutes and 55 seconds. As we're awaiting further information from SpaceX, the last update from them was that they were go for prop load on the Super Heavy booster. That was about 7 minutes or so ago. We are seeing some frost forming on the ship upper stage. You can see in this wide shot. Look at the propellant tanks. You have the liquid methane up top, which would be further along at this point since it started first, and the liquid oxygen tank frost line down below. Just starting to see that really fill out. Again, for those just joining us now, it is 6:10 p.m. Central Time, 7:10 p.m. Eastern, 23:10 UTC. SpaceX is in a hold in its countdown. Clock stopped at T-minus 39 minutes and 55 seconds. As far as comparing that to the countdown timeline, that was just after the start of the planned beginning for liquid methane load on the Super Heavy booster and just before booster liquid oxygen load was set to begin. Not seeing quite as defined of a frost line as we also might have expected at this point in the fueling timeline on the ship upper stage as well. But tanking on the Ship 37 vehicle at the top of the Starship Super Heavy stack did begin at about T-minus 53 minutes and T-minus 45 minutes for methane and liquid oxygen, respectively. So far, SpaceX has not provided a reason for the hold or even confirmed on their end that the hold is actually in place with any type of public statement, but their clock has stopped again at T-minus 39 minutes and 55 seconds. Could be for a variety of reasons, potentially connected to the temperature of either the LOX or the methane. There could also be another ground systems issue, or perhaps something connected to the launch vehicle itself. We're standing by for more information. SpaceX has an hour-long window for today's launch opportunity. We do have another update for you. The SpaceX clock on their launch page for their website has recycled, now showing T-minus 12 hours and holding. That clock is not moving at this point in time, so it appears as though, and actually we do have confirmation from SpaceX just breaking now, that they are, quote, standing down from today's 10th flight of Starship to allow time to troubleshoot an issue with ground systems, end quote. So we have an official scrub of today's launch attempt for Starship Flight 10, as they are, again, working through, quote, an issue with ground systems, end quote. As we mentioned, the clock recycled to T-minus 12 hours, but that may just be a template in place as teams assess the ground systems. We'll await for further updates from SpaceX to see if, in fact, tomorrow is a viable option for the launch of Starship Flight 10. But for those just joining, if you're just now hopping into the stream, SpaceX has officially called a scrub of the mission today. Quote, standing down from today's 10th flight of Starship to allow time to troubleshoot an issue with ground systems, end quote. And so once again, the current information that we know is that SpaceX is standing down from a launch attempt today, troubleshooting an issue with ground systems, and that the clock on their launch page for their website has recycled to T-minus 12 hours. However, because it is A, not moving, and B, because SpaceX has, at this moment in time, not declared a launch attempt happening tomorrow, we will have to wait and see if tomorrow is in fact in play for Starship Flight 10, or if they are looking for a little bit further into the week for their 10th flight of Starship. Before we go ahead and sign off, want to bring our friend and space reporter with Ars Technica, Stephen Clark. So, Stephen, a disappointing end to the day down there at Starbase. Not necessarily surprising, given that SpaceX has had some trouble with Starship in the Block 2 configuration for the ship upper stage. As they describe it, though, this is a ground systems issue. But before we go ahead and wrap up, just want to get your thoughts on where today ended, and you're thinking about where they're going to be going in the next, hopefully, 24 hours, but potentially longer than that.
Yep, not terribly surprising, although I will say that SpaceX has a good record not scrubbing Starship countdowns. I'd have to go back and look at the stats, but this is Flight 10. This is maybe the second or third time I can remember, maybe the third. Somebody fact check me here, but third time-ish that I can remember a Starship scrub loading began. So not rare, not unheard of, but not surprising for any of us who are accustomed to the launch business at all.
Yeah, not at all. And the fact that they didn't activate the water deluge system certainly lends credence to the thought that they could, obviously the ground systems issue being the long pole in the tent, they could potentially have a launch campaign tomorrow if they're able to resolve that in time, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. But like I said, it's a very rare thing for a fueling campaign to scrub, as opposed to it being a weather issue.
Right, and it looks like the weather was cooperating, although I was just outside speaking to a colleague of mine a few minutes ago before the scrub that some clouds were starting to roll in. So, if it had launched today, it probably would have disappeared into some high cloud cover. But we'll see what the weather holds tomorrow. Hopefully they make another run at it tomorrow. The weather forecast does look a little bit better tomorrow. I haven't heard an exact percentage in terms of a probability of good weather, but the general forecast from the National Weather Service shows a slightly lower chance of rain tomorrow, and then actually improving even more later in the week. So weather trending in the right direction if they can get this bug resolved.
Well, fingers crossed for the team down at Starbase. I know it's always frustrating getting to the cusp of launch, then having things snatched away from you right at the end. But hopefully, maybe Hope Springs Eternal delay with the launch maybe puts the technical talk back into contention before the launch of Starship Flight 10. Obviously, that's a little bit more up in the air than the launch itself, so we'll have to wait and see if that ever gets rescheduled before the launch takes place.
We can hope.
We certainly can. Well, we don't have to hope. We can just be thankful that you are so gracious to take some time and join us today. And Stephen, we'll look forward to talking with you again whenever SpaceX is ready to launch. But in the interim, where can folks follow your work at Ars Technica?
Yeah, just www.arstechnica.com. It's ARSTECHNICA.com, and you can find my work there and the wonderful work of my colleague Eric Berger, also another veteran space reporter, there at Ars Technica.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Stephen, and safe travels back to your hotel tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. And thanks to our team for being at the ready to cover this mission. Want to thank our moderators in the live chat, to Jeff Hansen, Mark Otto, and Astro Joe, and Astro Jen. Good to see you. Really appreciate all of you for helping us out in the live chat today. Thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor Stephen Young and photographer John Pisani for running the technical operations of the broadcast in the background. Most importantly, thanks to you for wherever you've been watching from. Also, be remiss, big shout out to our friends at Lab Padre for providing these views of the Starship stack down at Starbase, Texas. They do excellent work covering the Starship program and the evolution of now the town of Starbase. So if you haven't already, you should go ahead and give their YouTube channel a follow as well. And if you're not already, be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel here at Spaceflight Now, and we'll be more than welcome to have you back with us again when next SpaceX is ready to take a crack at launching Starship Flight 10. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I am Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.